When my son told me I wouldn't be welcome at his house for Thanksgiving, I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I just smiled, drove home, and made one phone call. By the time the turkey came out of the oven, his perfect little world was already crumbling. And that was only the beginning. My name is Edward Morales. For more than 30 years, Thanksgiving wasn't just a holiday. It was the holiday. My late wife, Isabel, lived for it. She loved the rituals, the cooking, the warmth of family gathered around one table. After she passed away, I made it my mission to carry on her tradition. I roasted the turkey just the way she used to. I made her stuffing recipe, written in her faded handwriting. And every year, I invited the whole family into my home. But traditions are fragile things. And sometimes, it only takes one person to shatter them. That year, my son Michael decided Thanksgiving would no longer include me. His wife, Vanessa, had been planting seeds for months. Subtle comments about how cramped my house was, how outdated my kitchen looked, how their friends had modern holidays with charcuterie boards and wine pairings. At first, I ignored it. I thought it was just vanity or insecurity. But then Michael sat me down in his gleaming kitchen, the one I had paid for, and said the words I'll never forget. "Dad, we're doing Thanksgiving with Vanessa's family this year. It's just easier if you sit this one out." Easier. That word rang in my ears like a bell. I looked around his living room, the hardwood floors I had installed myself, the crown molding I had gone into debt to finish, the designer appliances I had co-signed the loan for. Every corner of that house had my fingerprints. And yet, I was being erased, scrubbed out like a stain that didn't match their new decor. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply nodded, stood up, and said, "Of course, son." But inside, something broke. On the drive home, I passed glowing windows where families gathered, laughter spilling into the night. My house, in contrast, was quiet. The table was bare. The chair where Isabel used to sit remained empty. For a moment, grief almost swallowed me whole. But then, something else stirred beneath it, resolve. They thought they could humiliate me, discard me, treat me like a burden. But I was done playing the fool. I pulled out my phone and made a single call. Not to a friend, not to a sibling, but to an attorney I hadn't spoken to in years. His name was Martin Delgado, and he had once helped me sort out a messy property dispute after Isabel died. Martin picked up on the second ring. "Edward, long time no hear. I need your help," I said. My voice was calm, steady. "It's about my son." That night, while Michael and Vanessa no doubt fussed over table settings and fine wine, I sat at my kitchen table with Martin on speakerphone, pulling out old files and bank statements. We went over deeds, trusts, and ownership papers. Piece by piece, I laid out just how much of their so-called perfect life was built on my sacrifices. Martin asked me one simple question. "Do you want to cut them off? Or do you want to teach them a lesson they'll never forget?" I closed my eyes and pictured Isabel's handwriting on that stuffing recipe card. I pictured the empty chair at my table. I want them to remember who built their foundation. And I want them to regret ever thinking they could push me out. From that moment on, the plan was set in motion. For the next few weeks, I played my part perfectly. When Michael called, I acted cheerful. When Vanessa posted pictures of centerpieces on social media, I liked them like a proud father. I even offered to send over one of Isabel's old recipes, knowing full well they'd never use it. Behind the mask, I was busy. Martin and I redrafted my will, restructuring every account, every asset, every deed. The house Michael lived in, still under my name. The business he bragged about running, funded by loans I had guaranteed. Even the car Vanessa drove was technically leased under my credit. Every safety net they thought was theirs belonged to me. And with a few signatures, I could pull it all away. The irony was almost poetic. They had told me to stay out of Thanksgiving, to keep my distance. And so I did. But while they basted their turkey and poured their wine, I was carving out a revenge feast of my own. And I hadn't even reached the main course yet. I learned early that rage makes you predictable. I didn't want to be predictable. If they had their theater, I would have mine. Small, deliberate acts that looked like nothing at all until the whole thing collapsed. Martin started with the obvious, paperwork. That's where families lie for a living. People sign things they don't read. They trust signatures more than they trust conversation. Over coffee in his cramped office, while rain stitched the window panes, we went through everything I owned, and more importantly, everything I had let them believe they owned. "You want to make it untouchable," Martin said. Not revenge for revenge's sake, but protection for what matters. We can do that discreetly. The trick is to leave them thinking they still have a map while you build a wall. So we built walls. Irrevocable trusts where the money for the business, the rental properties, and the equity in Michael's house were moved out of reach. I transferred titles to entities that required multiple signatures or trustee approvals. I set up scholarships in Isabel's name, small at first, visible enough to become part of local lore, and funneled some funds into community projects that would make public the purpose of that money. The goal was not only legal separation, but social entrenchment. If the money was for the kids, it would be harder for a judge to hand it over to men who had already shown contempt for family duty. At the same time, I wasn't naive about the other side of this game. Paperwork could be faked, trust could be challenged. So we layered defenses. Safe deposit boxes for original deeds, biometric protections on digital accounts, and notifications set up with banks and lawyers so any action would require a fingerprint or a meeting with me present. Martin set up a system where nothing moved unless I touched it, physically and deliberately. It was tedious. It was also brilliant. While Martin dealt with the legal skeleton, I turned my attention to the social meat. People believe what they hear from the mouths of those they like. I needed witnesses who'd stand on truth, not because they loved me more than family, but because what I needed them to see was obvious and right. I reconnected with old neighbors, with men I had worked with on union sites, with the Sunday crowd at the church who remembered Isabel's casseroles. I told them stories about scholarships, apprenticeships, plans to finally rest and teach the next generation. I made my intentions public in small, human ways. Letters to the community paper, calls to the local youth center, a casual mention at the barber shop. The more my plans lived in the open, the harder it would be for them to bury the facts under family spin. Underneath all that, I set small traps. Nothing illegal, never that. I left drafts of wills in plain sight. I forgot to lock certain files on my office computer, and when I came home late one night, I found the cursor blinking where someone had been looking at the dates for a property transfer. They'd left a digital fingerprint. I installed a camera in one room that I never used, more to catch movement than to judge faces. It captured Kevin more than once, standing in the hall at odd hours, the hallway light painting his silhouette like a picture borrowed from a suspense novel. I also hired a woman named Liza to help with small investigations. Not the lurid kind people imagine, no tales on suburban streets at midnight, but precise, careful work. Liza traced the flow of loans and petty transfers Michael had used to build his image. She found the private line of credit that had covered a business expense, which was actually a renovation on a house I had helped finance. She photocopied receipts, matched dates, and compiled lists of people who'd co-signed for loans or written innocent-sounding letters. Each little piece assembled into a portrait. Their lives weren't built on sweat and vision. They were built on loans I'd guaranteed, on credit I had risked for them, and on a convenient habit of taking without asking. I kept my face pleasant. I answered calls with a voice that sounded as comfortable as an old sweater. When Michael called to ask if I'd mind if they moved a loan to my name for a lower rate, I said I'd look into it. When Vanessa asked if she could host a fundraiser at my shop, I offered my space. My replies were laced with the kind of fatherly generosity that reads well in social posts. My kindness was visible, and that made my later moves harder to attack. If there's a single truth about revenge that rarely gets said, it's this: slow patience looks like weakness to those who expect to profit from it. There were nights when the work felt like weight dragging me down. I'd sit with the copies Liza had made, the spreadsheets Robert sent through, and the emails Martin drafted, and I'd imagine Michael's face when the air finally leaked out of his balloon. I would go over the words I'd want to say and then tear them up. I wanted facts to speak for me, not flourished lines. So I cataloged dates, saved screenshots, and recorded offhand boasts Michael made in the garage while tinkering with his tools, thinking I wasn't listening. He talked about closing things up and making sure Dad got his rest. That language, so clinical and casual, became gold in the dossier we were building. One evening, Kevin pulled up in my driveway with a grin and the sort of bravado that only the ignorant wear. He told me about a friend who could smooth paperwork, someone who knew how to make titles look legitimate. He laughed and tossed a business card on my kitchen table like a magician revealing a trick I was supposed to admire. I kept my face passive, but I called Liza the second he left. She ran the name. It tied back to a man registered as an intermediary on a string of shell companies. It was the kind of link that, if exposed, would make the supposed help they'd been getting look like collusion. As the Thanksgiving date approached, the pressure in the house tightened like a drawn drum. Michael dropped by more often, always with small asks. Can I borrow a tool? Could you sign this simple form? Vanessa would text photos of table settings and ask my opinion on a centerpiece I'd once bought for her. I gave small answers. I offered a neutral smile when they discussed the new family traditions they were building. I kissed my palm and brushed it across the photograph of Isabel's empty chair, then set that picture back in an obvious place on the mantel. If they wanted performance, I'd give them performance. It was rehearsed patience. There was a final, practical step we took that felt almost cruel. Martin arranged for a private meeting with the bank manager and the title company that handled our properties. We presented an updated signature card, biometric requirements, and an irrevocable notice that no transfers or loans could be initiated from my accounts without in-person confirmation. The bank representative asked gentle, surgical questions. He'd seen this kind of thing before. When the paperwork was filed, the bank set an alert system and an access barrier that would make any sudden transaction instantly suspicious and reportable. It was protection disguised as routine. And yet, with all the iron and lockboxes in place, a human part of me still wanted the family I'd raised. There were mornings I woke and walked the house, running my hands along the banister I had stained myself, imagining Michael's small shoelaces and scraped knees. But the ache of those memories was different now, tempered with purpose. I wasn't simply protecting assets. I was protecting a legacy, and sometimes legacies require fortress walls. On the morning of Thanksgiving, while they glued napkins and polished glasses, I poured myself a cup of black coffee and looked at the stack of folders on the kitchen table. The dossier was thick enough to be read like an indictment. I'd done my part, learning the slow grammar of bureaucracy and the quick grammar of human error. When the turkey came out of the oven in Michael's house that afternoon, I was not there to watch their smiles. I imagined them raising their glasses to each other, to the life they supposed they'd never have to earn. I imagined the empty chair at my table, finally filled with the idea of retribution. Because I had chosen the long road. I had accepted the loneliness of patience and the tedium of paperwork. It wasn't glamorous work. It was the kind of work that leaves a man with less time to grieve and more time to plan. And behind all the legal scaffolding and neighborly small talk, there was one quiet truth. When the moment came to reveal everything, they would not only lose what they thought they owned, they would lose the safe story they had told themselves about who they were and why they deserved it. That, more than money, would be the thing that broke them. By the time Thanksgiving morning arrived, the house was quiet, but my mind was alive with a steady hum. I wasn't cooking a turkey or setting out china plates. I was stacking papers, double-checking signatures, and reviewing a timeline that would bring Michael and Vanessa's world to its knees. They thought they had pushed me aside, but what they didn't realize was that I'd already stepped off their stage and built my own. That afternoon, while their kitchen filled with the scent of rosemary and butter, I sat in Martin Delgado's office, sipping coffee that had gone lukewarm hours ago. The folder in front of me was thick. Deeds, account summaries, evidence of unauthorized withdrawals, even screenshots of Vanessa's quiet little shopping sprees on cards linked back to me. Martin flipped through it all, page by page, until finally he looked up and said, "It's airtight." I nodded, though a piece of me still felt the sting. Airtight or not, it didn't erase the memory of Michael as a boy, running through fallen leaves with stuffing-stained hands, laughing at Isabel's jokes. I wondered, not for the first time, where that boy had gone. But grief had no place here. Not anymore. Instead, I asked Martin to file the paperwork that would finalize the transfers into Isabel's scholarship fund and the apprenticeships trust we had created. The beauty of it all was that none of it was hidden. Every move was legal, every step above board. It just happened to leave Michael and Vanessa with nothing. By evening, while they carved turkey at their glossy table, I carved something far more satisfying, the illusion they had wrapped themselves in. Because here's the thing about arrogance, it makes people sloppy. Michael and Vanessa weren't just living off my money. They were flaunting it. Vanessa had been posting photos online all week. The imported wine, the catered desserts, the bespoke centerpieces. She tagged the location, bragged about the luxury. Every post was another piece of evidence that their lifestyle wasn't earned. It was borrowed, and worse, borrowed without consent. Liza, the investigator Martin had put me in touch with, compiled the posts into a neat digital record. "This isn't just vanity," she told me, sliding her laptop across the desk. "It's a trail. The more they brag, the more they prove." So I let them brag. I let them bask in their borrowed glow, unaware that the floorboards beneath them were already rotting away. In the days that followed, the fallout began quietly. Vanessa tried to make a large purchase, a Black Friday splurge, no doubt, only to find her card declined. Michael marched into the bank to demand answers, only to be told the accounts were frozen pending owner verification. When he tried to call me, I let it ring. When he sent a text, "Dad, something weird is happening with the accounts. Can we talk?" I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the messages straight to Martin. "The panic is starting," he said with a thin smile. But panic wasn't enough for me. Not yet. I wanted understanding. I wanted the realization to sink into Michael's bones that the foundation of his life wasn't his own, that every square inch of comfort, every indulgence, every smug dismissal of me had been built on sacrifices he barely remembered. That moment came sooner than I expected. The Sunday after Thanksgiving, Michael showed up at my house. He didn't knock. He barged in, his face red, Vanessa trailing behind with her arms crossed like a shield. "What did you do?" he demanded, slamming a crumpled bank letter onto my table. "They froze everything. The mortgage, the accounts, even the business line of credit. I can't access anything." I looked at the paper calmly, then back at him. "Everything in that letter," I said evenly, "belongs to me. It always has. You just mistook access for ownership." Vanessa scoffed, muttering something about manipulation, but her eyes flickered when I mentioned the scholarship fund. She hadn't expected me to move money out of their reach. Michael's bravado faltered. His voice cracked when he said, "Dad, you can't just cut us off. I have a family. I have responsibilities." I leaned back in my chair and let the silence stretch. Then, finally, I spoke the words I had been holding back since the night he uninvited me to Thanksgiving. "You decided I wasn't part of your family anymore. You made that clear. So don't expect to feast on the work of my lifetime while you erase me from the table." For the first time in years, Michael had no response. He stood there, fists clenched, Vanessa pulling at his arm, and I watched the realization settle in. They left without another word, the door slamming behind them. I sat there in the quiet house, the echo of their exit lingering like smoke. But I wasn't done. Freezing the accounts was only the first step. The real reveal, the moment everyone in their carefully curated circle would see the truth, was still to come. And I wanted it to happen on their stage, not mine. So when the invitation to Vanessa's Friendsgiving Gala arrived in my mailbox, no doubt meant to rub salt in the wound, I knew exactly where the curtain would fall. When the glossy invitation to Vanessa's Friendsgiving Gala landed in my mailbox, I almost laughed. The heavy cardstock, embossed lettering, and gold trim screamed money they no longer had. They wanted to project abundance, to prove their lives hadn't been shaken. But I knew the truth. Their accounts were frozen, their credit locked, their business suffocating under the weight of legal clamps Martin and I had tightened. The gala would be their final act of bravado, and I was going to turn it into their public undoing. I didn't RSVP. I didn't call. I simply showed up. The venue was a rented hall on the nicer side of town, all faux chandeliers and white-draped tables. A live band played soft jazz, and guests mingled with glasses of champagne they assumed had been paid for. Vanessa floated around in a sequin dress, her smile plastered on like paint cracking at the edges. Michael greeted guests with handshakes, though I noticed the tightness around his eyes, the stiffness in his shoulders. When I walked in, a hush spread through the room. Heads turned. Some whispered, some smiled politely, some avoided my gaze entirely. Michael froze when he saw me, then quickly forced a laugh. "Dad, you made it after all." I smiled, but not the way I used to. "Wouldn't miss it," I said, my voice carrying farther than I intended. Conversations dimmed around us. The moment had arrived. I let him lead me to a table near the front. Vanessa approached, her tone sugary, but her eyes sharp. "So glad you're here, Edward. We weren't sure you'd get the invitation in time." "Oh, I got it," I replied, pulling a thick envelope from my coat pocket and setting it on the white tablecloth. "And I brought something too." Michael's smile faltered. Vanessa glanced at the envelope as if it were ticking. The band quieted. Guests began to notice the tension, the way Michael's jaw twitched, the way Vanessa's hands fidgeted with her bracelet. I rose slowly, the envelope in my hand. Since we're all gathered here to celebrate gratitude, I began, projecting my voice so it reached the far corners of the hall. I think it's only fair that I express mine. A ripple of curiosity moved through the room. Glasses lowered. People leaned in. I'm grateful, I continued, for the lessons my son and his wife have taught me this year. Lessons about trust, about loyalty, and about betrayal. Michael stepped forward, his voice low and desperate. Dad, sit down. We don't need to do this. But I didn't sit. I opened the envelope and pulled out the stack of documents Martin and I had prepared. I laid them one by one on the table, my words sharp and deliberate. These, I said, holding up the first page, are the deeds to the properties Michael claims as his. All under my name, legally transferred into trusts that fund scholarships in Isabel's honor. Gasps rose from the crowd. Vanessa's smile collapsed. These, I said, placing another set of papers down, are bank statements. Accounts that Michael and Vanessa have drained, used for parties, for renovations, for appearances. I held up screenshots of Vanessa's social posts, her bragging about luxuries she hadn't earned, all while excluding me from the very holiday I built for this family. Murmurs filled the air. Guests exchanged glances. Someone whispered, "Is this real?" I pulled out the final document, a notarized letter from the bank confirming the freezes. As of now, every cent they believed was theirs is gone. Locked. Redirected to causes that matter. Apprenticeships, scholarships, community projects. Not vanity. Not greed. The room fell silent. All eyes were on Michael and Vanessa, who stood frozen, their carefully constructed facade unraveling in real time. Vanessa's voice broke first, shrill and desperate. He's lying. He's bitter and jealous. He's trying to ruin us. But the evidence sat on the table, undeniable. The signatures, the seals, the printed statements, truth in black and white. Michael's face crumpled. He tried to recover, to laugh it off, but the sound rang hollow. "Dad, we could have worked this out privately," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. I looked at him, my son, my betrayer, and for the first time, I felt nothing but clarity. You erased me from your table, Michael. Tonight, I erased the illusion you built on my back. Consider it even. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then, slowly, conversations resumed, but not the kind they wanted. Guests whispered, pointing, shaking their heads. A few excused themselves and left early. The band packed up sooner than scheduled. Their grand gala had transformed into a wake. I gathered my envelope and walked out into the crisp night air, leaving them standing amid the ruins of their pride. Behind me, I heard Vanessa's voice crack in fury, Michael's muttered pleas, the murmur of guests dissecting every word I'd said. But I didn't turn back. Thanksgiving had always been about gratitude, Isabel used to say. And tonight, I was grateful, not for family, not for tradition, but for the strength to reclaim my dignity. And the sweetest part? Their humiliation was only just beginning. The night of the Friendsgiving gala ended in whispers and broken glass. Words spread faster than fire in a dry field. By morning, the cracks in Michael and Vanessa's polished image weren't cracks anymore. They were gaping holes everyone could see through. The fallout came in waves. First were the friends. People who had once lined up for Michael's parties stopped returning his calls. Vanessa's inner circle unfollowed her online, quietly distancing themselves from the woman who had boasted with stolen wealth. Pictures of champagne and sequin dresses were replaced with silence, then pitying comments, then nothing at all. Next came the finances. The bank, alerted by Martin's filings and the evidence we'd compiled, launched an internal review of every transaction tied to Michael's accounts. The credit lines he had relied on evaporated overnight. The mortgage payments he had assumed would sort themselves out came due in full. And when he tried to refinance, the trust paperwork I'd signed made it impossible. Then came the business. Suppliers who had extended him credit called in their debts. Clients backed out, wary of being tied to scandal. The business he had once bragged was expanding by the month collapsed within weeks, leaving him scrambling for scraps. But the most painful blow, I imagine, wasn't financial. It was social. Thanksgiving had been the stage for his rejection of me. Now, every holiday gathering afterward became a reminder of the humiliation he and Vanessa had endured. They couldn't escape it. Every neighbor, every friend, every relative knew the truth. And me? I didn't gloat. I didn't throw parties or shout my victory from rooftops. I went about my life quietly, but with purpose. I poured myself into the scholarship fund in Isabel's name, shaking hands with young students who reminded me of the woman I'd loved, bright-eyed, hungry for knowledge, eager to make a difference. I visited the apprenticeships program, watching young tradesmen learn the crafts that had built my life from the ground up. Their gratitude filled the hollow space my son's betrayal had left. People in town started looking at me differently, not as the quiet widower in the old house, but as the man who had taken betrayal and turned it into something enduring. Some stopped me in the grocery store just to say, "Good for you, Edward. You stood your ground." But at night, when the house was still, I sometimes felt the weight of it all. Michael was still my son. There were days when I missed the boy who used to sit at Isabel's table, cheeks red from running outside, laughing with mashed potatoes on his face. That boy was gone, buried under years of entitlement and arrogance. One evening, weeks after the gala, Michael came to my door. He didn't barge in this time. He stood on the porch, shoulders slumped, eyes tired. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize him. "Dad," he said softly, I messed up." I studied him, trying to find sincerity in the wreckage of his words. Maybe it was there, maybe not. But forgiveness isn't something you grant like a bank loan. It's earned, slowly, with honesty and change. I told him, "You'll always be my son, but you'll have to live with the choices you made. And if you want redemption, it won't come through me handing you another chance. It'll come from you proving you deserve it." He nodded, eyes glassy, and left without another word. I don't know if he'll ever change. Vanessa, from what I hear, spends her time trying to claw her way back into social circles that no longer want her. Michael picks up odd jobs now, living in a rental far smaller than the house he once flaunted. Maybe that's punishment enough. As for me, I've reclaimed my holidays. That Thanksgiving, I set Isabel's recipe card on the counter, roasted a turkey the way she used to, and invited neighbors, apprentices, and students to share my table. The house was full again. Laughter, warmth, the clatter of forks against plates. The empty chair wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with gratitude. Real gratitude. And when I raised my glass at the end of the meal, I didn't toast to revenge or victory. I toasted to resilience, to rebuilding, to remembering that betrayal can cut deep, but it can also clear the path for something better. Michael and Vanessa tried to erase me from Thanksgiving. Instead, I erased the illusion they built, and in doing so, I reclaimed not just my dignity, but the legacy Isabel and I started together. Revenge had been sweet, but renewal, that was sweeter still.